Hi everyone, greetings again from Ganubi Baptist Church. It's Marc Morrell here, back from Turkey, where I had the privilege of leading a team of 20 people through the great city of Istanbul, and then through the 7 churches of Revelation. I cannot tell you what a meaningful and powerful experience that was as we relived Bible history, as it were, and walked the streets of those 7 churches. And just to let you know, at each of the 7 sites, we had our cameras rolling, and I recorded a brief message from each of those 7 churches. And I'm quite sure they'll be up on the YouTube channel in no time for you to enjoy. And you'll see me and you'll see the group in those historical areas as we unpack Bible history, so to speak, on the spot. It was an incredible experience, and just to whet your appetite, I'm hoping to lead a similar team to the 7 churches next year, March 2024. So as they say, watch this space. And who knows, maybe you can be one of those who joins me on that incredible life-changing trip. Well, friends, we're into part 7 of our end time series in the book of Revelation. And this week we're in chapter 12. If you backtrack a little bit, the previous chapters, chapters 9 through 11, deal with a couple of important aspects. Number one, they deal with the 7 trumpets. That really speaks of 7 judgments that will be poured out upon the earth during the 7-year Great Tribulation period. That same period of time when the 4 riders we spoke about earlier in the series will be wreaking their havoc on the earth in different areas of life. And then, of course, in chapter 10, we read about the 2 witnesses. And again, we spoke about these 2 witnesses in the last message. They will be used by God during the Great Tribulation period to preach the gospel, and their message will be accompanied by great signs and wonders and miracles. But today, and I'm quite sure next week as well, we're in chapter 12. Now, friends, chapter 12 is a vitally important chapter because it gives us specialized information into the invisible realm, into the spiritual realm. And it's a realm we don't really pay much attention to as we live our everyday lives. But just because you can't see it doesn't make it any less real than the physical realm in which we live. The spiritual realm is the realm in which God and angels and demons live and move. And we know that since the fall of Satan, there's been constant conflict going on in this invisible realm, and the effects of this cosmic conflict spill over and are felt and experienced in the physical realm in which we operate. Think of it as the real Star Wars for those familiar with that series of movies. But really, Revelation chapter 12, as I mentioned, is a critical chapter. Unless you get a grip on this chapter, you'll have great difficulty understanding history as well as future prophecy. None of it will really make sense until we understand the principles of Revelation chapter 12. The story is told from World War II of a famous general in the Allied forces by the name of George Patton. And his nemesis in the German forces was a general named Erwin Rommel. Now, Patton and Rommel faced each other in a series of battles, but what Rommel didn't know was that Patton had studied his textbook on war strategy. And so on the battlefield, Patton was always one step ahead of Rommel because he knew exactly what Rommel was going to do next. And this, of course, gave him a huge advantage. At one point in a battle, they got so close to one another that Patton yelled out his tank window as he saw Rommel, "I read your book, Rommel. I read your book." Friends, jokes aside, we have God's book. We have God's eternal word that shows us, that reveals to us the strategies and the modus operandi of our spiritual enemy. And that's why Paul writes to the church in Corinth, and he says, for we are not unaware, we are not ignorant of Satan's devices. So with that in mind, let's open God's Word. Let's turn to Revelation chapter 12. I would encourage you, if you have a Bible available, turn there for yourself. And let's, for this week, just focus on the first 6 verses. Revelation 12, verses 1 to 6. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her head, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. Sorry, did I say the moon? I said the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. I wasn't sure if I got that right the first time around. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Well, friends, there are 3 key characters in these verses that we need to consider today. And those are, number 1, the woman, number 2, the dragon, and number 3, the child. The woman, the dragon, and the child. But let's begin with the woman there in verse 1. Listen to what John writes. It says, a great, the word there in the Greek would be the word mega, a great, a big sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. Now, interestingly, there are 4 women mentioned in the book of Revelation. In chapter 2 and verse 20, we read about Jezebel. That name should be familiar to you, Jezebel. And Jezebel symbolizes paganism, the worship of false gods and idols, and rebellion, especially in the area of sexual immorality. That's Jezebel. But then in chapter 17, we read about the scarlet woman. She's a harlot, she's a prostitute, and she represents the apostate or the counterfeit church. And then in Revelation 19 verse 7, we read about the wife or the bride of the Lamb, which of course represents the legitimate church, the bride of Christ. And then here in chapter 12, we have the 4th woman. What does she represent, I wonder? Well, without a doubt, this 4th woman spoken of here in chapter 12 is Israel. And that's not surprising, because we know that in the last days, particularly in the last days of the Great Tribulation, Israel will be a key player on the world stage. And we touched on that in our previous message. There are just so many Old Testament prophetic scriptures connected to this truth. But let me just share one with you from Zechariah 13 verse 1. On that day, there shall be a fountain open to the house of David, open to Israel, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to wash away sin and impurity. And then, of course, Paul, the apostle, reminds us in Romans 11 that there is coming a day when all of Israel will be saved. So, friends, this is the context of Revelation chapter 12. We're nearing the end of the Great Tribulation, when Jesus will return, the second coming, to set up his millennial reign and rule in the city of Jerusalem. Now, verse 1 gives us a very interesting description of the woman. Did you notice it? A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. Now, that description should immediately set a bell ringing in your head, especially if you've read the book of Genesis lately, because it's very similar to what we read in Genesis chapter 37, where Joseph had his second dream. Listen to Genesis 37. Joseph says, speaking to his father and to his brothers, I had another dream, a second dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And friends, we know as we read through the book of Genesis, we know that's exactly what happened in Egypt. And so in the dream, of course, the moon represented Jacob, the sun represented his wife Rachel, and the stars, of course, were the 11 brothers. But now let's go back to chapter 12, and this time we read not about 11 stars, but we read about 12 stars. And of course, logic would tell us that the 12th would be none other than Joseph. And so collectively, those 12 stars represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And so without a doubt, this woman spoken of in chapter 12 is a picture of a redeemed, a restored Israel, as all of God's covenants and all of God's promises made to her over the years are fulfilled at the end of the Great Tribulation. Now, interestingly, we're told in verse 2 that the woman is pregnant. She is experiencing labor pain, about to give birth to a child, but we'll get to that child a little bit later on in the message. But the second character mentioned in these verses is the dragon. The dragon. Have a look at verse 3. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous, the word there is the word mega, an enormous mega red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Well, yeah, we certainly don't have to surmise. We don't have to guess who this dragon is, because just further down in verse 9 of Revelation 12, we're told exactly who we're dealing with. Verse 9 says, the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, Satan, who leads the whole world astray. And for those who enjoy Bible trivia, Satan is referred to as a dragon 13 times in the book of Revelation. But friends, I'm sure you know this is just a symbol of reality. It's not a literal, a physical description of the devil, but it speaks of his vile character. The problem in these days is the devil in our culture has been reduced to a little guy in a red outfit, running around with a pitchfork and horns, a comic book character that many don't believe in or certainly don't take very seriously. In fact, Gallup did a poll and they discovered that most Americans believe in God, but most Americans don't believe in a literal devil. Something to think about. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said humanity falls into 2 equal and opposite errors concerning the devil. Some people take him too seriously, while others don't take him seriously enough. On the one hand, you have denial. On the other hand, obsession. So denial, think about it. You can't have a more dangerous enemy than one you don't believe exists. The other extreme is obsession. And I've met many Christians over the years, and I'm sure you have as well, who seem to be obsessed with the devil. They see a devil behind every door. In fact, they even try and cast the devil and demons out of their scrambled eggs. They've got the whole balance wrong, and they forget the Bible says, greater is he who is in us than he that is in the world. John White authored one of the best books I've ever read on Christian living called The Fight. if you can get your hands on that book, The Fight, it'll really be worth your while. But listen to what John White writes. He says, I have no delusions about demons and the reality of their hostility. No doubt they will oppose you as you obey Christ. If you play it cool and live with the lukewarm, compromised faith, you will have no trouble from them. But if you are serious about Christ being your Lord and your God, you can expect opposition. So, look at this dragon's description. This dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns. 7 heads. Now, the number 7 in the book of Revelation, and I guess throughout the Bible, is a very significant number. And it speaks of totality. It speaks of completion. Just as 7 days make up a complete week, and 7 notes make up a complete scale, the idea of 7 heads speaks of a comprehensive intelligence. Friends, make no mistake about it, our spiritual adversary, Satan, is a highly intelligent being. He knows, he understands human character. He understands human nature. He knows our areas of weakness and vulnerability, and therefore he can design temptation specifically suited for you. A 7-headed dragon. But what about the 10 horns? Remember, an animal's horn was an animal's strength. The horn was used to fight. It was a powerful weapon. And today, Satan dominates. Satan exerts strength and power and influence in many realms, in many arenas of the world. In fact, 2 Corinthians 4 verse 4, Satan is referred to as the God of this age. And he has authority. And friends, that authority has been given to him. The Bible tells us here he has crowns upon his heads. The citizens of this world have surrendered, knowingly or unknowingly, surrendered, yielded power and authority to Satan. And one thing we know about this dragon is that he most certainly, more often than not, does not appear as a dragon, but rather disguises himself as an angel of light. An angel of light who is a master of deception. A master of deception who always reveals the short-term pleasures, the short-term benefits of sin, but conceals the devastating long-term consequences. A master of deception, an angel of light. You think about how many marriages and families have been destroyed through the deception of lust. How many people today do you know that are drowning in debt through the deception of wealth and power and success? How many churches continue around the world to be damaged and destroyed by seemingly innocent gossip and murmuring? And friends, so the list goes on. We haven't even spoken about things like unforgiveness and things like pornography and alcohol and drug addiction. This enemy is a subtle, deceptive enemy who disguises his true intentions. The illustrations told of polar bears that hunt for seals in the Arctic, and they take a deep breath and then they dive beneath the ice and they swim to the feeding holes of the unsuspecting seals. Then they gently scratch with their claws on the ice to imitate the movement of fish under the ice. The seal is deceived. The seal thinks it's a fish that is being portrayed beneath the ice, and the seal is lured into that hole only to discover it has been deceived and is about to become dinner for that bear. Friends, a dragon, yes, but disguised as an angel of light. So we've spoken about the woman, that would be Israel. We've spoken about the dragon, that would be Satan. But finally, the third character we need to consider is the child. Have a look at verse 5. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. Now, without any shadow of a doubt, I think we all agree, we all know, this child is none other than Jesus Christ himself. Isaiah 9 verse 6, that wonderful prophetic scripture. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders. Now, Satan knew this prophetic word in Isaiah and many other prophecies about the reign and rule of Jesus. And so right from the beginning of the Bible, he was on a mission to destroy the child, to destroy the seed, to destroy the line from which the child would be born. There are many examples, but let me just give you a couple of them. For example, in Exodus, Pharaoh, you may remember, orders the execution of all young Jewish boys, effectively trying to destroy an entire race of people. There's no guessing who is behind that murderous, evil plot. In the book of Esther, we read about Haman. Haman wants genocide. He wants to destroy every single Jew in the kingdom. Again, this murderous demonic plot to wipe out the potential line of the Messiah. Even in the New Testament, Jesus is born, and what does King Herod do? King Herod declares that every male child 2 years and below in Bethlehem is to be exterminated, is to be murdered. Another satanic plot designed to destroy the child. And then think about that Friday afternoon on a hill outside of Jerusalem around 3 p.m. when the dead body, the corpse of Jesus, was taken off the cross and placed into a tomb. Friends, that afternoon there must have been a party in hell. We've done it. We've destroyed the seed. We've destroyed the child. Well, clearly Satan hadn't read the fine print, because Jesus, before his death, spoke these powerful words in John 10 verse 18. He said, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again." And we know that's exactly what happened on Resurrection Sunday morning. But whatever the conflict going on in the heavenlies, the one thing we know is that in the end, victory will be ours. The end of the book has already been written, and friends, we know that in the end, Satan will lose and Jesus will win. In fact, verse 5 tells us Christ will rule the nations with a rod of iron. That rod of iron speaks of absolute power, speaks of supreme, unmatched authority. Yes, when Jesus returns as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, he won't need democracy. He won't need to be voted into power. He won't need the opinion of men. He will rule, and he will reign with absolute power, with supreme authority over his creation. And friends, at that time, every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. The end of the story has been written, and Jesus wins. May that message bring great joy and encouragement and hope to your heart, and may you live this week in the victory and the power of Jesus. We'll do it again next week. God bless you, and see you then.